Los Angeles is a city of endless reinvention. Homes that once belonged to legends become just another stop on a Hollywood real estate carousel. But some houses refuse to let go of their past. Some carry echoes of the ones who lived and died within their walls. In early 2024, a young couple, Ryan and Claire Thompson, moved into a stunning modernist home overlooking the Pacific Ocean. It had belonged to Matthew Perry, the beloved Friends star who passed away tragically in 2023. The house, with its sleek glass walls and infinity pool, was meant to be their dream home. First, everything was perfect. The view was breathtaking, the interiors immaculate. But soon, the house began to reveal its secrets. Claire was the first to notice. One evening, as she unpacked boxes in the living room, she heard the distinct sound of water splashing outside. When she stepped onto the patio, the pool was eerily still. But the scent of chlorine was heavy in the air, as if someone had just emerged from the water. Ryan dismissed it. Maybe the wind, he said. But then, the TV started turning on by itself, always playing Friends, always the same scene. Chandler Bing delivering one of his signature sarcastic lines. The remote lay untouched on the coffee table. Then came the nights. Claire would wake up gasping, feeling a presence in the room, as if someone were standing at the foot of the bed. Ryan, ever the skeptic, told her it was just sleep paralysis. That was, until he saw the figure himself, a shadowed silhouette standing near the balcony, staring out at the ocean before vanishing into the night. The most unsettling incidents happened around the pool. On more than one occasion, Claire heard the faint sound of laughter, deep, warm, familiar. It was the kind of laugh the world had known, the kind that had filled millions of living rooms. One evening, Claire, feeling a strange pull, walked barefoot to the pool's edge. The water shimmered unnaturally under the moonlight. She swore she saw ripples forming, as if someone had just stepped in. A whisper floated through the air. I was just getting started. She turned, expecting to see Ryan. But she was alone. Determined to understand what was happening, Ryan did some research. He found old interviews where Perry had spoken about his struggles, his loneliness despite his fame, and his desire to be remembered for more than just friends. Claire, shaken but compassionate, began speaking aloud in the house, addressing the presence she felt. You're not forgotten, she would say. You mattered. Over time, the disturbances grew less intense. The laughter faded. The eerie chill lifted. It was as if the house had needed to grieve, to let go of its famous occupant. But even today, some say that on quiet nights, if you listen closely by the pool, you can still hear the soft echo of a voice, dry, witty, unmistakable, whispering one last joke into the Hollywood night. The disturbances never fully stopped. They only changed, subtler now, more intimate, as if whatever presence lingered in the house had decided it no longer needed to frighten, only to exist. The air remained thick with an unseen weight, something neither Ryan nor Claire could name but could always feel. It settled into the walls, into the spaces between the glass and steel, hiding in reflections and in the silence that stretched too long between breaths. One evening, as the sky blushed deep orange and purple over the Pacific, Claire sat alone in the living room, curled into the plush corner of the couch with a book she had no intention of reading. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes a person hear their own heartbeat. Ryan was out, and the setting sun cast long golden beams across the polished floors. Then, a whisper so faint it could have been the wind, but she knew better now. Hey! The voice came from behind her, close, but not close enough to touch. Claire's breath hitched, her fingers tightening around the fabric of her sweater. She turned her head slowly, dreading and hoping all at once. Nothing. Just the wide-open space of the living room, the floor-to-ceiling windows revealing the darkening sky, the last streaks of daylight stretching thin. But in the glass, for the briefest of moments, she saw something, someone. A reflection that wasn't hers. She twisted around. Empty air. The book slipped from her hands, landing with a soft thud on the floor. Claire exhaled shakily, pressing her palm against her chest to steady the frantic thrum beneath her ribs. She whispered, barely audible, "You're still here." A beat of silence. Then gentle, amused, as if the response was obvious. Yeah. The room's temperature dropped just enough to raise the hair along her arms. Claire swallowed, her pulse hammering in her throat. It was one thing to sense something. It was another to hear it. To know, without doubt, that she and Ryan were not the only ones living in this house. She squeezed her eyes shut. When she opened them again, the reflection was gone. That night, Claire didn't tell Ryan what had happened. Instead, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening. The house had a sound of its own, a rhythmic hush, like breath. It expanded and contracted, as if something unseen stirred within its walls. Somewhere outside, past the glass doors leading to the patio, the pool water lapped softly, as though disturbed by a presence she could not see. The pool had become a thing of quiet dread for Claire. It was beautiful. Yes, an endless sheet of liquid silver under the moon, its surface undisturbed, reflecting the night like a mirror. But it was a mirror that held secrets, that whispered back when no one was speaking. She avoided looking at it too long. Yet, on some nights, like this one, the air itself seemed to nudge her toward it. Ryan had gone to bed early, his exhaustion evident in the way he barely muttered a good night before disappearing into their room. Claire had stayed up, pretending to read, pretending to be comfortable in a house that watched her. Now, long past midnight, she stood by the glass doors leading to the patio, staring at the water. A breeze drifted in through the slightly open door, carrying the scent of the ocean, the faintest taste of salt on her lips. The palm trees swayed lazily, casting long, skeletal shadows across the concrete. The city below was nothing more than a smattering of distant lights, a reminder that life moved on beyond this house. Then the sound. Soft, gentle, but unmistakable. A ripple moved across the pool, slow and deliberate, as though someone had run their fingers through the water. Claire held her breath. The night was perfectly still, no wind strong enough to disturb the surface, no falling leaves to explain the motion. Yet the water shifted again, small waves pulsing outward from an unseen touch. Her hands curled into fists at her sides. She told herself not to step forward. She told herself that whatever was happening, whatever had been happening since they moved in, it wasn't real, couldn't be real. But her feet moved anyway. The patio tiles were cold beneath her bare soles. She felt exposed out here, the night pressing in around her, wrapping her in its stillness. Her breath left her in a thin wisp of vapor as she stopped at the edge of the pool, staring down. The water was perfectly clear, the underwater lights casting a pale blue glow that shimmered like something alive. And then, a shadow. Not hers. It moved beneath the surface, a shifting darkness that had no form, no logic. It drifted, elongated, stretching just beneath the glow of the lights. Claire's pulse slammed in her ears. The water remained undisturbed. No bubbles, no splash, just the silent, gliding motion of the shadow. It moved closer to where she stood, and for one terrible moment, she thought she saw something more than just darkness, something pale, something like the curve of a shoulder, the briefest flash of a face. Then, just as suddenly, it was gone. The water stilled. The night resumed its breathless hush. Claire let out a shaking exhale and took a stumbling step back, her chest tight, her body screaming at her to run. But she couldn't. Not yet. She looked up, her reflection now visible in the great glass windows of the house. And just behind her, standing at the water's edge, another reflection. A man. Not Ryan. Someone else. Someone watching. Her breath caught, her body stiff with terror. But when she spun around, the patio was empty. The pool was still. Only the faint scent of chlorine remained, mingling with the cool night air. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. Claire stood frozen, her skin prickling with something deeper than fear, something colder, something that reached into the marrow of her bones. The patio stretched out behind her, open and empty, the night breeze whispering through the trees. But she knew she had seen him, a shape, a presence, something that did not belong in the world of the living but refused to leave it. Her breath came shallow, the weight of the house pressing against her back. The glass doors stood open just enough for the night air to spill inside, carrying the hush of the ocean, the distant hum of the city below. It was as if the house itself was waiting, listening, holding its breath along with her. She turned back toward the pool, half expecting the shadow to have returned beneath the water, shifting and twisting in that impossible way. But it was still now, too still. The silence of it felt unnatural, like the moment just before something moves, before something happens. A sound, soft, just behind her, a shuffle, the whisper of movement against stone. Claire's entire body seized, her muscles locking in place. She wanted to turn, but fear had its grip around her throat, squeezing tight. Then, "You see me now." The voice was quiet, rough around the edges, barely more than a breath against her ear. A voice she recognized, though she had never heard it like this before. Not in person, only through a screen, through the laughter of an audience, through years of reruns and nostalgia. She turned. The patio was empty, but the doors had been open only a crack before. Now they yawned wide, the house gaping like a mouth, swallowing the night into its depths. A chill slid down her spine. The air inside was different now, heavier, charged with something unseen but undeniably there. Claire forced herself to step forward, into the house, into whatever waited. The moment she crossed the threshold, the temperature dropped, and the lights flickered, not the erratic, random flickering of faulty wiring, but something measured, deliberate, like breathing. The living room stretched out before her, bathed in shadows and the cold glow of the pool filtering through the windows. And then, just past the coffee table, the figure. He wasn't fully there, not solid, more like an impression left behind, a memory replaying itself in the dim light. He stood near the couch, his hands in his pockets, his head tilted slightly as if amused, as if waiting for her to say something. Matthew Perry, or what was left of him. The shape of him flickered at the edges, as though he were made of something thinner than air, something struggling to hold together. His face was barely distinguishable, but the outline of him, the posture she knew. Claire's breath came shallow, 1,000 thoughts colliding in her mind all at once. This wasn't possible. This wasn't real. And yet, he took a step forward. The air in the room thickened, pressing in from all sides. Claire wanted to move, to speak, to do something, but she was locked in place, her body unresponsive. Then he smiled, just a small, weary thing. And for the briefest moment, the house felt different. Less heavy, less wrong. "I didn't mean to stay." His voice was softer this time, not the whisper in her ear, not the disembodied breath against her skin. This was him. Claire's throat tightened. She found her voice, but it came out barely above a whisper. "Then why are you still here?" His form wavered slightly, as though the question had unsettled him, pulled at the fragile threads holding him together. His gaze drifted past her, out toward the pool. "I don't know." The words felt like an admission, like something he had never been able to say until now. The lights flickered again, harsher this time, as if something else in the house, something unseen, was reacting. A deep, humming silence filled the room, pressing against the walls, against her chest. Then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, he was gone. The weight in the air lifted, but only slightly. The house still watched. The pool still waited. And Claire knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her gut, this wasn't over. The silence after his disappearance was worse than his presence. It left an emptiness in the air, a raw, gaping absence, as though the house itself had inhaled and was waiting to exhale. Claire stood unmoving, her breath shallow, her arms stiff at her sides. The living room stretched before her in uneasy stillness, the faint glow from the pool casting a shifting, liquid reflection across the high ceiling. He had been there, as real as anything in this house. But now he wasn't. And yet, she could feel him like the lingering warmth of a hand after it has been lifted from skin. She turned her head slowly, half expecting to see him again, standing just beyond the veil of darkness. The house had a way of making her feel watched, as if she were never truly alone. Even now she sensed it, presence. Not oppressive, not entirely malevolent, but aware. Claire let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Came out unsteady, trembling. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the rapid flutter of her heartbeat beneath her ribs. She needed to wake Ryan. Her feet carried her toward the hallway, but the house felt different now, as though her footsteps were too loud, echoing in a space that had suddenly become vast and hollow. The hardwood floor was cool beneath her bare feet, the air unnaturally still. She passed by the kitchen, and in the reflection of the darkened window above the sink, she thought just for an instant she saw movement behind her. A flicker, a shift of shadow. Claire didn't look back. She reached the bedroom door and hesitated. The knob felt unnaturally cold beneath her fingers. She turned it slowly, careful not to make a sound, as if something unseen might hear her. Inside, Ryan was asleep, his breathing deep and steady. The blankets were tangled around his legs. His arm draped carelessly over the empty space beside him. Claire stood there for a long moment, staring at him, grounding herself in the normalcy of his presence. She wanted to wake him. She should wake him, but would he believe her? Would he hear the same whispers, feel the same weight pressing in around them? Or would he dismiss it the way he always did? Claire took a slow step forward, reaching for his shoulder. But a sound. Soft. Close. Not in the room. Behind her. Her body went rigid. The hallway. The door was still open, and beyond it, the darkness stretched out, long and unbroken. The shadows shifted in the dim moonlight, and for one terrible moment, Claire was certain she was not alone. She turned her head just enough to see into the hallway, and there standing just beyond the threshold at the edge of the light, a figure, tall, still, watching. She didn't move, didn't breathe. The figure didn't move either. It simply stood there, just barely outside the bedroom, its form barely distinguishable in the dark. Then, a step forward, slow, measured. Claire's breath hitched in her throat. The figure was not Ryan. It was not a dream, not a trick of her mind. It was him, Matthew Perry, or what was left of him. And this time he did not disappear. Claire's breath came in short, uneven gasps, her chest tightening as if the air itself had thickened, pressing against her ribs. She could see him now more clearly than before. Not just a fleeting shadow at the edge of her vision. Not a blur in the pool's reflection. He stood in the doorway, his form wavering slightly, as though caught between here and elsewhere. The dim light from the bedroom cast a pale glow over his face, or what remained of it soft, blurred at the edges, like an image that refused to focus. He was wearing something casual, a loose shirt, dark pants, barefoot. The details flickered, unstable, as if reality itself was unsure how much of him to allow through. But his eyes were fixed on her, dark and knowing. Claire couldn't move, couldn't think. She wanted to speak, to force words past the knot in her throat, but the weight in the room made it impossible. Instead, it was he who broke the silence. "I never wanted this." His voice was low, edged with something tired, something that stretched beyond the confines of time. It was not the voice of a television icon, not the playful sarcasm the world had loved. It was something else entirely. Something raw. Claire swallowed hard. "Then why are you still here?" A flicker of something passed over his face. Regret? Confusion? He shifted slightly, glancing past her toward the bed where Ryan still slept, oblivious. Then his gaze returned to her. "I don't know." It wasn't just an answer. It was an admission, heavy with the weight of things left unfinished. The air between them seemed to hum, charged with an energy Claire couldn't describe. Her heartbeat pounded against her ribs, but she forced herself to stay still, to hold his gaze. She could feel it now, not just fear, not just the unnatural chill in the room. There was sadness in him, a deep, aching loneliness that seeped into the very bones of the house. He had been loved by millions, yet in the end he had died alone. And now, here he was, trapped in the echo of his own solitude. Claire took a slow, careful step forward. "Maybe you need to leave," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. A flicker of something unreadable crossed his face. He hesitated, his form wavering slightly, as though something unseen had tugged at him. The lights in the hallway dimmed, the shadows lengthening. Then, "I can't." The words were barely spoken, more like a thought given shape in the heavy air between them. And suddenly Claire understood. It wasn't that he wouldn't leave. It was that he didn't know how. His life had been a cycle of struggles, of pushing forward only to fall back again. And in death, that cycle had not ended. He was stuck, caught in the unfinished remnants of what had been. A deep, pulsing quiet filled the space between them. Claire took another step. "You're not alone," she said. "Not anymore." His form flickered again, more violently this time, like a signal caught in static. His gaze lifted slightly, something shifting in his expression. And then, a whisper of movement. Not from him, from behind her. The air changed, grew heavier, darker. Claire felt it before she saw it, the unmistakable sense of being watched by something else, something colder, something that did not belong. A shadow stretched across the floor, reaching toward her. She turned, and the breath left her lungs. There, standing at the far end of the room, was something wrong. Not Matthew Perry. Not human. It was tall, unnaturally so, its form shifting in and out of the darkness like smoke refusing to take shape. Its presence was suffocating, pressing down on her with a weight that made her knees tremble. It had been here all along, watching, waiting. And Matthew, he wasn't the cause of the haunting. He was the victim. A realization struck her like ice through the chest. He wasn't trapped in this house because he had chosen to stay. He was held here, by it. The shadows rippled as the figure took a slow step forward, the very fabric of the room seeming to warp around it. A deep, resonant hum filled the space, vibrating through Claire's bones. Matthew's form flickered wildly now, his presence weakening, his edges blurring into nothingness. His gaze snapped to hers, and in that moment, she saw fear. "You have to go." His voice was strained now, barely holding shape. "Now?" Claire felt it too, the pressure, the cold grip tightening around her limbs. The presence of something far older, far worse than a lost soul. The lights sputtered, the air thickened, and the darkness moved. A hand, if it could even be called that, reached toward her, elongated, unnatural. The shadows around it twisted, writhing like something alive. Claire stumbled backward, her breath coming in sharp, panicked gasps. Ryan stirred in the bed, mumbling something in his sleep, but the world around her had already shifted, already closed in. The presence surged forward. Matthew's form fractured, breaking apart like mist in the wind. His voice rang out one last time, desperate. "Run!" And then, the house erupted into darkness. The last thing Claire saw was the shifting void reaching for her, swallowing the light, the air, the space itself. And then, nothing. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.